Hi guys, what a year it has been. 20 cars filmed, over 100,000 views of my videos on YouTube, and the launch of my brand new classic motoring channel, Classics Driven. I've been lucky enough this year to drive and film some of my favourite cars, and to discover the greatness of some cars that I wouldn't even have considered before getting behind the wheel. I've got quite a few thank yous to make, not least to Great Escape Cars, without doubt the UK's leading classic car hire company, and who partnered with me this year to bring you a lot of these films. And then there's those people who got in touch to say, hey Woody, I've got a classic Ford or a classic Ferrari sat in the garage. Want to film it? Hell yes I did. But most of all, I need to thank you for watching, sharing, and giving me feedback on my films. I spent countless hours researching cars, writing scripts, shooting content, editing the footage. I've been hot and sweaty, I've been cold, tired, frustrated, stressed, wired, and I've got really excited about really silly things when it comes to cars. But you know what? Every time somebody tells me they enjoyed something I created, it makes all the hard work, all the blood, sweat and tears, as they say, worth it all over again. I've got some big plans for 2016, some very exciting things that are actually already underway. But before we fire up the engines and the iPad again, I thought I'd give you a rundown of my top 10 cars that I filmed in 2015, based on nothing other than how I felt when I was filming them. At 10, it's a car which I never actually thought would make my top 10 of anything. In fact, I barely gave it a second thought. And perhaps that was the magic of discovering the Jaguar XJS this year. With its 5.3 litre V12 engine, armchair comfort and refinement belying its production year, the E-Type's successor failed to capture the thoroughbred of its predecessor. And perhaps that's what makes it such an accessible way into classic car ownership. Who could have predicted that? Compared to, say, an MGB, the XJS is positively presidential. The V12 engine is nothing more than a soothing thrum. One of my ultimate classic sports cars ever is the Austin Healey 3000. With its iconic British sports car design and its rally pedigree, it truly is one of the greats. For that reason, I could never have expected the HMC Mark IV, the Healey continuation, to have made it into my top 10 of cars filmed in 2015. It's made of plastic. It's got the wrong engine. To all intents and purposes, it's a replica of the original car. But then it looks like a Healey. It's got luxuries and refinements an Austin Healey 3000 could only have dreamt of. And let's face it, there can only ever be so much wrong with a Rover V8 engine sports car. Imagine how excited I was when this arrived. Very excited, until I did this. It's plastic. The HMC doesn't just resemble the Healey 3000 though. It takes the character of the original car and brings it up to date. Imagine if you could take your ideal classic car, add some refinement, some modern luxuries, some reliability, and more power. Now you see why I'm excited, don't you? Talking of engines, if there's one thing that stirs the soul of a classic Ford fan, it's the sound of a V6 engined Capri. The 280 Brooklands was the last of the Capris to roll off the production lines, and it was clear that Ford had taken everything that they'd learnt to make this car something special. The Capri is a major success story in the classic car investment world, a fitting tribute to the legendary Ford Mustang, to which the car owes its original inspiration. The 280 Brooklands is leery, full of 80s charm. And finally, it seemed my sideburns had met their match. In its day, the 280 Brooklands Capri was a very credible, very reliable, very capable sports car. And in classic car terms, not much has changed. If you can find a good example like this version from Great Escape Cars, you'll find any excuse to get out and drive it. It's powerful, it handles well, it's stylish, and having gone up in value in the last few years quite significantly, the Capri is quite a player in the classic Ford world. It's increasingly rare that we see a car aimed at the masses which offers supercar performance and track day practicality. Such criteria is now reserved for the likes of the KTM Crossbow or the Ariel Atom. Yet in the early 2000s, Vauxhall took the unusual step of adding a true sports car to its lineup. This was no Astra GTE or Calibra Turbo. This was a car designed to do one thing: make you smile behind the wheel. Now, if you're scoffing, saying, he's talking about a rebadged Lotus Elise, you've clearly never driven one in the rain with no clothes on. The VX220 is number 7 in my top 10. And the goggles are essential, yes, because there's no filter on the heaters, so flies get sucked in and then spat out at you like ninjas, little ninjas. And my bum's sticking to the seat though. And it's raining. How old were you when you first heard about the Mini? Chances are you don't remember, because it's up there with the ABCs and the 123s. It's the first time most of us ever find out there is such a thing as a car. The Mini has been many things to many people, the choice of learner drivers and global superstars. It's been a rally car, it's been a film star. The Mini is motoring's most famous social climber, and it makes it into my top 10 at number 6. Here's why. But how on earth did this little social climber start out as an obvious choice for a first car and end up as just as obvious a choice for a rock star and a valuable classic investment? Was it novelty value? Well, in 1959, when the car was first launched, you could probably say that. In the 70s, that was probably still true to a point as well. But for most cars over 50 years on, you'd have to presume that the novelty would wear off. Okay, it hasn't for the Mini, but that can't be the sole reason. You may by now have noticed a distinct lack of modern cars in my top 10 of cars filmed in 2015, because really I'm a classic car man at heart, but you knew that. It takes something very special to capture my imagination when it comes to today's cars, and it has to have a good story as well. When Infiniti flew me out to Portugal to be one of the first people to try out their highly anticipated new Q30 earlier this year, I was expecting a rebadged Mercedes A-Class. I have to be honest. I was expecting a car devoid of any personality or character. What I actually found though was an interesting take on the compact hatchback, a car which in concept at least seemed to reprise the story of the British motor industry. And I got to drive it around on stunning coastal Mediterranean roads to the soundtrack of a powerful 1.6 litre turbo engine. What's not to like? Milan is famous for being the place that explorers set off on their journeys of discovery. And this car, Infiniti hopes, will lead to a mass discovery of their brand. Okay, so the British motor industry didn't quite get things right the first time around, and perhaps this new era will see a few changes. I can assure you of one thing though, cars like that Infiniti Q30 are going to be a big part of the story. Talking of motoring stories, very few brands capture the imagination like TVR. I realised that to do this story justice, I had to do more than just film a car. So armed with a bright purple TVR Tuscan Speed 6, I went to meet some people who could tell me what was so special about a sports car legend which started out from a northern seaside town, and why there is so much excitement surrounding the relaunch of TVR. For me, motoring is much more than about cars. It's about people. I've met some great people while filming these films in 2015, and that is what TVR is Back was all about. Here's number 4.
It's a love and a care and a hobby.
From the minute I saw one, I've just felt it completely head over heels in love.
It rather reminds me of an E-Type Jag that a friend of mine once had.
But what are TVRs like to drive? In a word, incredible. This Tuscan is so raw. It feels so special. It's got a 4 litre straight 6 engine with allegedly 350 brake horsepower. And it sounds like a tractor, but it pulls like a train. On to the top 3 in my countdown of the cars that I filmed in 2015. My motoring story starts and ends with rallying. And the one car that everyone thinks of when you mention rallying is the Mark II Escort. Now there's a reason that Ford's humble saloon still rules the roost all these years on the rally stages. And there's a reason that the Mark II RS 2000 makes it in at number 3 for me. You see, this car allowed Ford to produce the Mark II Escort for that little bit longer. And it was all about that grille. Ford had a plan for the RS 2000 that went beyond every other Mark II Escort model. And it was arguably the grille that made all the difference. The Droop Snoot gang will surely claim that there was no one cooler in the 70s and 80s than Bodie from the Professionals. Whichever way you sit on that argument, if your discussion centres around the grille, you're missing the point. Any self-respecting petrol head will appreciate the passion and sporting pedigree of a classic Ferrari. What I find incredible though is that the Ferrari 308 GTB remained relatively unloved until probably around 10 years ago. And yet it is the Ferrari, it's the shape, the profile people think of when you mention Ferrari. It spawned some of the most hyper of hypercars the world has ever known. And it was driven by a man in tight shorts wearing a big moustache in a popular 80s cult TV cop show. The moment of starting up that Ferrari V8 and clicking that H-pattern shifter into its dogleg first gear position, for me was one of the defining moments of this year in shooting car films. Add to that the fact that the car I drove was absolutely pristine, like it had just come out of the showroom, and I could have been back in the 80s, only this time I wasn't wearing a nappy. Will Ferrari ever put their current generation cars on the rally stage? Unlikely. But that doesn't mean that they've forgotten about the 308. As long as we don't dwell on the fact that in 2015, Ferrari lost their status as the world's most powerful brand to Lego. The 308 would never have stood for that. Okay, this one might surprise you. Number 1 of the cars which I filmed in 2015. And it's not the fastest, the most capable, you might argue it's not the most desirable of the cars which I brought to life over the last 12 months. But it's been a pin-up for me ever since I was a kid. And if you'd have seen my face when this thing turned up for me to play with, you wouldn't be surprised at all. The Chevrolet Corvette C3 Stingray is everything a muscle car should be. It's big, it's outrageous, it's a real motoring experience. By the 1980s, the Corvette had become a dinosaur. The 5.7 litre V8 engine didn't do half the job you'd expect, and yet it makes all the right noises. It turns every head, and that bright red jukebox interior is to die for. Everyone needs to experience an American muscle car on UK roads at least once. But for me, there's something other than driving a car which sums up the motoring experience, and that's the car park test. How good does that car make you feel when you park up and leave it? I'm probably quite lucky not to have sustained serious injury or embarrassment while filming the Corvette Stingray, because every time I parked it up, I had to walk backwards away from it. It's all about the experience, the feeling of driving an American muscle car on roads that weren't designed for it, and in a decade that has tried its best to shake off such dinosaurs of automotive history and change its priorities. I'm going to get a complex next time I arrive at the petrol station in a normal modern car, because I'll cease to be that person that everyone wants to talk to. Cars like this make people want to talk about cars. Even people who hate cars, like Toyota Prius drivers, for example. Actually, maybe not them. That's it for my hugely subjective top 10 of cars that I've filmed in 2015. I bet you didn't expect the Corvette to be number one. Perhaps you expected the XJS to be higher up, or maybe even a car which I filmed that didn't make the top 10 would have been your number one. I'd love to know. If so, why not get involved on Twitter? Remember, dream big and stay safe on the roads. I'll see you in 2016 and I can't wait.